You are listening to a podcast series, Asking Soulful Questions, by Sacred Art of Living. To learn more, visit sacredartofliving.org. Today's podcast is a part of a series called The Question of Belief.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daryl Williams, your host for this podcast series called Soul-Size Questions. Today, I'm in Dewey, Arizona, and up in our studio in Bend, Oregon, we have Eric Sarenson, a spiritual caregiver from Lakeview, Oregon. Joining Eric in Bend is your longtime friend and founder and director of the Sacred Art of Living Center, Richard Groves. So guys, this is the final podcast in our series about belief. And today we'd like to explore this question. What really is the value of spirituality? Starting with you, Eric, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your spiritual path? I hear you wear a lot of hats in your community and aren't just involved with one specific religious congregation, right?
Absolutely. I came to Lakeview partly to be a pastor, partly because of God's sense of humor. And I believe that, I went there and I did what I was taught to do, which is just go everywhere there's people who help people and ask if there's something I can do to help. And one of the first areas I got into was hospice. They were in need of a spiritual caregiver, and I began the journey of becoming a hospice caregiver, chaplain type, and then became a law enforcement and emergency response chaplain because I had become educated and comfortable with the death and the trauma and the dying journey, and then became the hospital chaplain. And now I'm a little bit of whatever's needed. I tell people that I am the shepherd of wandering souls.
Yeah. Well, I hear you've also got a prison outreach program that you're doing.
Yes, I also preach a service for our local minimum security prison, and I also do jail visits. Anywhere people are hurting is kind of where I belong.
Have you always been that way? I mean, I'm always curious about, I feel like people follow kind of a path in their life, right? And I'm curious about how you ever got started along that.
Oh, yes. So my dad was a cook in the Army, 20 years, because he got into trouble so many times and so often and spent so much time on kitchen patrol duty that they finally said, why don't you just become a cook? He found his passion in cooking, and our home had food and love and laughter. And being military, we often had broken homes and broken friends, and they could come and they would be safe with us. And so we've always had people as part of our family that just belonged because they needed a place. And that continued on until my dad's death from cancer. And then in that journey, I wanted to, really just be helpful. And the place where help was needed most in my journey during my dad's cancer journey and death was we needed someone who was useful, not just professional, not just sorry to see someone lose their dad and their husband and their friend. We needed someone who could be useful. And so that's been the core, is learning how to be helpful for those who are hurting.
So people listening to this or watching this who know nothing about Oregon, much less Lakeview, Oregon, it seems important to say that when I think of Lakeview, I think of middle of nowhere. I mean, not as a put down, but just really 100 miles from anywhere, right?
It is. It's 100 miles from the nearest city. I have to drive 100 miles for Walmart.
Hmm.
I have to drive, 55 miles for good Italian food. I have to, these are just, I came 3.5 hours here just to talk with Richard, and we have lunch and conversation together. And we live differently. The town is only 2,500 people. And having come from the Portland metro area, it was like shifting from fifth to second, where you live at a different pace. But I also honestly tell people I was ignorant before coming to Lakeview. I didn't know what it was like to be known. In a small town environment, one person really can make a difference for good or bad. And when I was introduced to that, it was because the waitress came over and said, "You're the new preacher in town." I'm like, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Oh, yes, we know. You're getting married, and after your honeymoon, you'll be here. We're expecting you in September." And I looked at her as City Mouse. I'm like, "Lady, you're scaring me." I said, "Tell me you talked to Miss Cleo or something." And she goes, "Oh, we know so-and-so who knows so-and-so who goes to your church. We know more about you than you do."
Wow.
And your reputation has spread beyond Lakeview. And I suspect part of it is this shirt of yours, your Fun Shirt Friday tradition that you introduced to the local hospital there. I mean, I'm thinking in rural America, you're not walking around in black clerical robes, that this would definitely be an interesting calling card. Is that part of your approach here?
Only one day of the week. It was during the dark times of COVID. In a small town, we have the same proportion of death and trauma and problems. The difference is we know them. We know them. We know their family. Odds are we know the names of their dogs. We know where they live. They're our neighbors, our friends. And COVID hit hard. We lost a lot of people to burnout and to death and to in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to do something to make a difference. I checked it with my boss and made sure that we weren't going to violate dress code policy, and then decided to let people know I'm going to declare Fun Shirt Friday. And I came in wearing shirts like this on Friday. And now it's so normal that if I don't wear one, people start to freak out that something's wrong or someone has died. And I need to be formal for a reason.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. It's interesting because I love what you're saying about being useful. I've been on a spiritual path, it seems, a long time, and I've always felt like it doesn't really matter if it doesn't make any difference in the world, right? I don't care what your belief system is. If it's not being helpful, well, what value does it have? Can you talk a little bit about how you look at, with all these different hats on, and you are in religious settings versus spirituality? I mean, do you make a definition at all in your mind, or is it all encompassed in what you do?
Oh, it's very much in my mind. So to differentiate spirituality and religion being different, all, as far as I know, humans throughout history, anthropologically, as far as I've studied, I've never read of a naturally occurring atheistic civilization. That humans are spiritual, meaning that they have a journey. They have a concept of identity, worth, and value, relationship to all things, and a sense of the after, and a sense of the bigness and the life. That's spiritual. Every person, I can engage in a spiritual relationship. I can engage with people in a spiritual conversation anywhere, everywhere, all the time. Religion. Humans are also naturally religious, meaning that they've come to a conclusion and they know what they believe and why they believe it. To be useful is to realize that both are good and both are necessary. And in traumatic situations, often enough, it's religion that's the most important thing, because trauma wipes out everything. When someone has a traumatic event, then they experience true relational awfulness such that the mind can't hold it all. And so to get yourself back to ground zero, put your feet on something firm, that's what do you know? And what is true? And how do you know it to be true?
So do you have the phenomenon in Lakeview? I hear what you're saying, and I think our whole series has been about this. And I'm wondering there, in your experience in a smaller community, how you interface with people who maybe are not in crisis, don't formally associate with the religious tradition, maybe did once upon a time. And how do you hold, I guess, a wide enough perspective that you're obviously a safe person, that person could come to you and not feel judged because you're not going to a particular church? Just a curiosity how you deal with that person.
Oh, I'll give you a story. So we had a patient in who was really ticking off the nurses, just an ornery person, and they were like, "Eric, go deal with them." So I walk in there and they're like, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm the chaplain." They looked at me and said, "I don't believe in God." And I said, "I don't care." And they look at me and they go, "But you can't say." I said, "I don't care. What I do care about is you're ticking off my nurses. And my nurses are coming to me and complaining, and you're making my world worse. We need to talk." Next question was, "Don't you want to know what I believe?" I said, "Sure, as long as we get to the real point. We're talking about my nurses being upset with you. We need you to behave better. Well, let me tell you about what I believe and why I believe it." I'm like, "Okay, come on." Next thing you know, we're talking, we're laughing. I find out the spiritual journey and all the things that are going on. It's because I can hear the spiritual component of the journey is the hunger. It's hunger, desire, a passion. Something more is pulling me forward. I can touch on that with any person, anywhere, from any religion. That's where you are hungering for God. And in my own belief, God is hungering for you. And there is this natural magnetism that happens. All it needs is just someone to start the conversation.
And I think that's marvelous. And that's the kind of presence I know would be so helpful in the hospital bedside, in the prison situation. And I'm wondering personally, kind of to come back to the first question that Daryl asked, in terms of your own journey, you began, I think, we've known each other over a number of years, in a certain sort of religious background, tradition. You were ordained. And what happened in your own evolution to not lose that, but to broaden that so that you were able to deal your parish church as the community, no matter who you are? I guess that's a really different vocation than the person who really just preaches on Sunday to a particular group.
That's a tough one. Because ministers are like doctors. We get into the work because we want to help people. And what happens is we get into our journey part of it, and the business becomes the limiting factor, that you have to make money as a doctor. You have to follow these things and all these pressures. You have to see this many patients. In a minister, you have to have, we call it counting nickels and noses. You have to have this many people come to Christ. You have to have people join the church. You have to get this many baptisms or all these other things. when really the only reason we get into the work is because we love God and we want to love people and be helpful. But the things that you have to do as part of it become what has to be. Now, I started as a pastor. I'm Southern Baptist in ordination and training. I tell people we're not as mean as we used to be, at least in the Northwest. But what my journey was actually through hospice, death and dying, and then trauma, where to be a religious professional is to represent a religion, a tradition, when I come to a situation. Chaplains don't do that. Chaplains are people first. So I take all that I believe and all that I know and set it aside because it is not useful at this moment. I am not there to sell my version of Jesus. I'm there for someone else. And you have to learn that the person is the most important thing. And that's a rotten lesson, because once you start learning that one, you're ruined. And part of that was what you taught me. You ruined me for the ministry.
You know, I really resonate with that, Eric, and something you had said about the story with the guy that was being mean to the nurses, you know, because I was a bereavement coordinator in hospice and saw a lot of the same things that we all have in that work. And what I heard you say in that story was that unspoken, but that seeking to understand another person, right? Because when they know that you're interested in understanding where they're coming from, the whole dynamic changes, right? Then there can be a real conversation about what's important.
Well, as I talk with people, I'm like, the only thing that makes you, Daryl, and me, is the particular constellation of good and healthy desires that God put in you. And how they work together to make you. But these are all good and healthy desires. What happens is the tragedy, we call it birth. You're born into a messed up world with messed up people who do messed up things.
Yeah.
But what we learn is that we are never going to be given our good and healthy desires, and we learn how to make that happen. And so we enter the game, all the while knowing that what we're doing is not our true self. And so that pull happens, and it's often we play the game until trauma happens. Because that's when we go back to what is going on. And trauma is the time when a reorientation becomes possible.
You know, I so appreciate the story. And I've found, there's a lot of study being done today about the burnout and depression rate of clergy of all denominations across the board. And often when you peel back at that, it's not just counting nickels and noses. That's not a Catholic expression, but that's a good,
good Southern Baptist
that's
expression.
A good one.
We're good at that.
Yeah, we say butts and chairs, but anyway, I found though in chaplaincy training and in my own chaplaincy work, a kind of halfway house for many people who started off in ministry and exactly ran into maybe something that felt a bit too narrow. And this calling, though, that was really there, moved them to this term chaplain, which is very broad, very undefined. And it gave them often a second wind in life to be able to not have to come with an agenda to the bedside. I notice it's a big difference in hospital settings or in hospice settings or in the prison. If I come and really my marching orders are to get that person into this box, well, no matter how hard I try, that's going to be sort of sniffed, that agenda. And I think the chaplain, and if this is your experience, really is able to come without that, with a kind of freedom to find out what that spiritual hunger is underneath it all.
Sometimes. I mean, it really depends. There's no one size fits all. Chaplains aren't better or worse or anything other than it's just what's the calling of the human. The calling is not to do something. Mm-hmm. The calling is to be the you that God created you to be. That's including the innocence that he put there and all that you've learned about life. What would happen if all the life lessons that you've learned are combined with the innocent, pure desires of your heart? What happens is this huge explosion of yes in the life. That's what the calling of God is about. And you search doing things until you find who you are.
Yeah. Well, and it's in that search, I think, the authenticity of the search that finally brings us as whole people into the work. But I want to also go back to a lunch that we had here in town a few weeks ago. I think we might have scandalized the entire restaurant because you were laughing very, very loud, and I was enjoying the laughter. But we were talking about stories from the prison, and I was going back to my old prison days as a chaplain, and you were talking about one thing or another. In the middle of it, you introduced this term that I had never heard. Maybe this is a Southern Baptist term again, I don't know. But you were talking about men who get the holy tingles. Could you say something about that? Because that was terrific.
Goodness. Well, I was teaching at the prison. And so a lot of the adults in custody at the prison have never had formal education. They've never had discipleship. And so I was teaching them about Epiphany. We just finished Christmas. We were heading into the season of Epiphany. And I was like, do any of you guys know what this is? And they said, no. And I'm like, all right. First off, every human being comes to conclusions about life based on their experiences. Who am I? Who are you? What is life? They're all they're logical and they're based on your experiences. An epiphany is when God comes into your world and the experience changes your conclusions. If you're looking in the scriptures, that's what happened. People walked away with different conclusions about themselves, about God, about life. I said, if there's an experience of God and it doesn't change your conclusions, it's not an epiphany. It's the holy tingles. Oh, golly, the hair stood up on my arm. I could feel Jesus. I wept. It was beautiful. And I'm like, did anything happen? Are you a different person? Are you more loving, more kind, more generous? That, if it doesn't happen, is the holy tingles. It's a great experience, but it didn't change anything.
How do you find that those men in the prison, I'm assuming you mainly with men, how do they respond to what you're sharing? And like we've been talking about, is it useful to them?
Oh, I do. Nobody hears me preach without walking out with homework. I want people to put it into their lives to practice it. So I do that with the men that I'm working with. Yes, it's useful because that's what I intend. It's not preaching at them. It's engaging them in a conversation around, okay, here's what the scripture says. Now, so what? What difference does this make to you living in prison? Mm-hmm. And what are we going to do when you get out? Because I only have you now. What's going to get in place to help you out? And so the ones that are very motivated, they're taking notes, they're talking it up in group, they're doing laps around the center of the prison. They talk it up all the time. But they are hungry. The people ask if I enjoy preaching at church or prison more. The honest answer is I enjoy preaching at prison. Because in prison, they've been convicted, they've been tried, they've been sentenced, and now they're living out the consequences of poor life choices, whatever way. They know they need to change. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
They're living every day with you need to change. I'm part of the redemptive component of the corrections. We punish the bad behavior, but we redeem the good, and we find ways to touch on. That's the redemptive part. And that's what I do, is touch on that redemptive part to help them come back to find healthy ways to fulfill those good desires. In church, largely people are not looking to change. They're looking to make a good life better. They're looking to reinforce their religious beliefs. This is solid for when they face trauma, but it's not the same as the spiritual journey. And so in church, most of the work is convincing people that they need to change. In prison, most of the work is teaching them how to change, and they want more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's much more satisfying.
Yeah, I guess so much of what over the years here we teach in terms of death and dying, and not just what you need in the bedside, you who are dying, but we who are there as family, as helpers, as chaplains, is this word transformation, which is about the only word that I can grasp around spirituality that feels real, because there's a before and there's an after. Transformation is an experience. It doesn't happen in the head, and you can't fake it because everybody else around you knows, oh yeah, that was the holy tingles, and this was real.
Yeah, you're still the same as you were. Yeah.
Well, and part of that is to try very hard. We work very hard to not create a power differential. I am whole and healed, and you are broken and down here and here. Let me help you. That's one of the problems with the helping professions that we have, is just that we've got this power differential, broken people coming to us, and then we help them, and then they get better for us. And if they don't listen to us, then we label them non-compliant. But really, the issue is power differential. When we can know, I am the same as you. We are on the same journey. It's just different. And so I meet people not like this, but like this. And I meet these people anywhere. Grocery store, gas station, it's not like I'm hard to find or see. You can come and talk to me. That's part of being accessible. A preacher once asked me how to make more of a difference in the lives of people. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I said, nobody can see Jesus in you until you let them in. Let them in. And he recoiled and said, no, they'll hurt me. They have, and they will. And I said, you're absolutely right. Let them in anyway. If you want them to see the real God at work in a real life, they can't see it until they are in your life. And you have to approach the world like this, not middle finger first.
I think you're right at the center of it. And I would say, I don't know if this was your experience. In my experience, we had 12 years of seminary. It was a long time. And a lot of it was good training, but some of it was frankly indoctrination. Part of the indoctrination that was never said, but that we picked up, was that there was to be a power differential. That really was. And what I so appreciated about chaplaincy training was that was never the starting point. It was exactly what you're talking about here. And therefore, I felt for the first time, I was invited to be transparent. I was invited to self-disclosure, which I found in prison work was very helpful. Because if I'm there, well, you guys are in here, wait till you get it together.
Right.
What are the prisons that I still deal with in my life?
Oh my goodness, yes.
If I can't say that, I think that's what Johnny Cash did.
Right, yeah.
I think that's why they cheered when he was there, because he was somehow part of them.
He was one. A prison is any place you can't leave voluntarily. Prisons come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and we carry them everywhere. I just assigned someone for their spiritual homework to watch an old movie called Support Your Local Sheriff. And his jail had no bars in it because they hadn't gotten them ordered yet. But he had a bad guy, and he put him in the jail, and he sprinkled some red paint beforehand down on the floor. And the guy said, "What do I do? There's no bars here." And he goes, "What's the red on the floor?" He goes, "The last guy that tried to escape my jail." Fear kept that man in jail. Fear keeps people in prison in all of their life. The question is, what are you afraid of? And how does that interact with what you truly desire? Because they are so connected. You can find one and touch on the other just that easy. And it's always at a point of hurt, because it wouldn't hurt if it didn't matter to you.
Well, that seems like a logical place for us to stop. And I really look forward to continuing this conversation in the next episode of this series on what is spirituality really.
We would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Question of Belief. For more information about our entire podcast library, Asking Soulful Questions, visit our website at sacredartofliving.org.